Now, there are fears Iran could abandon a key treaty preventing the spread of nuclear weapons as fighting with Israel enters a fourth day. We've had civilian losses as well. 24 Israelis killed. Iran reports more than 200 dead. Former US President Donald Trump has called for a ceasefire, but warned Tehran that America would use its full strength if Iran targets US forces. Let's speak with Eylon Levy, former Israeli government spokesman and now host of Israel's State of a Nation podcast. Joins us live from Tel Aviv. Eylon, good afternoon to you.
Hello, Ian. Good afternoon.
When you see and look up in the skies on our TV pictures at these, incredibly disturbing scenes of all sorts of battles taking place, an objective onlooker would say, well, it's six of one and half a dozen of the other, as the old phrase goes. These are two powers fighting each other. Where do we point the finger of blame?
Yeah, we're really seeing some extraordinary scenes here with Israeli planes in control of the airspace over Tehran. I mean, imagine if the RAF could fly freely over Berlin in October 1939. Israel has taken the initiative here of doing the world a service, of destroying the Iranian nuclear project before Iran could get nukes. But let's not mistake ourselves into thinking that this conflict started on Friday. The Iranian regime has been waging a war of aggression against Israel on 7 fronts since the October 7th massacre. That's when Hamas, an Iranian proxy army, invaded Israel and was then joined by Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other Iranian proxy forces across the region, raining missiles against Israel from every direction. So what Israel is doing now is holding the Iranian regime to account for that war of aggression, but even more importantly, stepping in to stop the Iranian regime just before it could develop nuclear weapons and to cut off the ballistic missile program that threatened to engulf this country with ballistic missiles, but also export huge numbers of ballistic missiles to other anti-Western hostile actors.
And we also know, Eylon, and I can never work. My fellow humans fascinate me sometimes, and I look at people on social media protesting, talking to, Israel is this terrible terror state and all the rest of it. I think, hang on a second, hang on. We are talking about Iran here. These are the sort of almost the orchestrators, the puppet masters of Middle Eastern terrorism. These are the Tony Sopranos, if you like, of the region that are making this happen with, as you say, you mentioned Hezbollah and others. They're in charge of that. This is not a good regime. It's a horrendous regime. It has a bad CV of terrible, terrible things. And yet, for some reason, that all seems to get lost because the go-to response from many is still, Israel are the bad guys. And Israel, by the way, a country that is this big on a map, if people care to look, surrounded by countries that are far bigger and larger and certainly more threatening and dangerous.
Yeah, it doesn't get more David and Goliath than tiny little Israel taking on the powerful country of Iran to stop it getting nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary what we're seeing here because you mentioned Tony Soprano. From the way the Iranian regime talks, the way it leads crowds in chants of death to Israel, death to America, death to England, even, this is cartoon villain-like behavior. It doesn't get clearly more malign than Iran. And I think Britain is perfectly aware that Iran is an enemy state. The British government, previous government, this one, have spoken of Iran's malign influence. Its attempts to carry out attacks inside Britain. Its targets, attacks against British targets. And I think that's why most foreign governments, while paying lip service, to the need for de-escalation, are really quite happy that Israel is doing their dirty work by having the courage to destroy the Iranian nuclear project when they would never take military action, and they appreciate that their approach of diplomacy has failed. But yeah, there you have it. There is a huge section of the population in Britain as well, for whom Israel is the ultimate bogeyman, and nothing Israel ever does will ever be right because they think that Israel shouldn't exist. And you see what Israel derangement syndrome does to people when it has you taking the side of the brutal religious theocratic regime.
Yes, that's the bit that I can never quite get my head around. It's like, why would you be somehow endorsing this? Oh, the poor Iranian regime. The poor Iranian regime. Have you never watched the news or read a paper or a book or something? And yet, this is sort of where we're at. Even last week on this programme, Eylon, we had the former ambassador to Iran, former British ambassador to Iran. What I mentioned about Iran's ambitions to build a potential nuclear setup in their country. He literally called it BS live on air. He shouted out the word though, as if I'd said the most outrageous, impossible thing in the world.
I mean, the funny thing is that Iran's claims that it's not trying to build nuclear weapons are about the most transparent lie there is. Because why then does it have 400 kilos of uranium enriched to 60%? What can you do with highly enriched uranium apart from build a nuclear bomb? It's not for civilian energy. It's not for medical isotopes. The reason that you dig a nuclear reactor into a mountain and keep it secret from the whole world in order to develop highly enriched uranium is because you want to build a nuclear bomb. And when Iran's leaders say Israel must be destroyed and it's a cancer that must be eradicated, and at the same time it's enriching uranium you would only need for a nuclear bomb, you know, you don't need to be Israeli Mossad intelligence level to put 2 and 2 together and figure out what the Iranians are doing. And now Israel is taking this action because Israeli intelligence has shown, must have slipped under the radar for Western intelligence agencies, that Iran had taken action to start assembling a nuclear bomb, the only plausible thing they could do with that highly enriched uranium.
Indeed. As you say, you know, a 10-year-old could work that out, you might think. And just a final point, where does this story go next, Eylon? I mean, we know that, you know, Israel have been able to command supremacy above Tehran in that region. It is a fighting air force you would not wish to take on too easily. Will it remain like this? Are the Iranians going to go, all right, OK, you fired your warning shots, we're gone now? What's likely to happen?
This is not the war the Iranian regime wanted to fight. It poured billions into filling the Middle East with proxy armies and destabilizing the region to try to protect its nuclear sites. It never expected that in just 3 days of war, Israeli planes would have total control of the skies of Iran. And what Israel is doing now is degrading Iran's ability to keep waging a war of aggression. In just 3 days, Israel has destroyed 1/3 of the launchers they were using to fire ballistic missiles. And it's going after those missiles as well, so that Iran cannot continue to rain hellfire on Israeli cities. You know, I had to run to a bomb shelter at 4 o'clock in the morning, and even 2 stories underground, there was a deafening explosion because a missile landed less than a kilometer away. They are targeting civilian areas. And so Israel says Iran represents 2 existential threats. The nuclear bomb, you can't allow them to get a nuke, and the ballistic missiles as well, because they could overwhelm your defenses. So Israel is going to keep going. There's basically nothing standing in its way to go after the regime targets. And Israel's hoping, of course, that at some point the regime's leaders are going to get the hint that there's nothing to fight for, and they're going to try to flee. And ultimately, if the regime collapses, if Iran is able to form a democracy, like the former crown prince is calling, well, then that would be a whole new Middle East, because Iran would no longer have a government that wants to destroy Israel. So the conflict's gone.
Spot on. Listen, Eylon, you stay safe. Thank you for being on with us. I really appreciate that. Eylon Levy, former Israeli government spokesman, is now host of the podcast Israel, State of a Nation. Thank you to him.